Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Today we're going to take a look at Fallen from Watchtower Games. Now this game was on Kickstarter last year, maybe it was the end of 2013, somewhere along there. And it made quite a buzz on Kickstarter. I'm not sure if I even covered that in my Kickstarter update. I might have just missed it because I don't remember talking about it that much. But a lot of people were really intrigued by the game because essentially what it is, well, first off, it's very hard to classify this game, but I'll give it a shot. It's a dungeon crawling game, but no miniatures or tiles. It's just a card game. And so thematically it's a dungeon crawling game, but it's only 2 players. There's no party of adventurers. It's just Dungeon Lord versus Hero. But it's also a dice game, and it's also a choose your own adventure story game in a very broad sense, not quite like choose your own adventure books. So it's a kind of a mishmash of a lot of things coming together into its own unique entity. And I can tell you right now, before I get to my final thoughts, it is definitely unlike anything I have played up to this point. I thought I had played a lot of different fantasy games that all felt very similar to each other. This one is not similar to anything. Before I go any further, let me go ahead and give you a very brief look, hopefully, of how the rules work. There's a lot of stuff going on in this game, a lot of different cards, a lot of different special abilities, but I'll try my best. Then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Alright, so this is a setup for Fallen. Obviously it's a bit compressed because of my limited table space. It's a 2-player only game. 1 player is going to take a Dungeon Lord. You have 3 Dungeon Lords to choose from in the base game. You have Krogarn, the Ogre King, who I have laid out here. You have, that's the heroes. Here's the Archivist of Souls and the Forge Master. And the thing about this game, the heroes and the Dungeon Lord all have their own character-specific cards. So for instance, if I choose Krogarn, the Ogre King, I'm going to have specific cards that I'm going to shuffle into his power deck and into the final battle deck will have his own specific cards and so on. And the same thing with the heroes. The heroes have their own skills that they are potentially going to use, their own starting equipment, and so forth. Now the hero that I have laid out here is Merace, the Sorceress, and again, just like the Dungeon Lords, there are 3 in the base game. You have Merace, the Sorceress, and then the other ones that I did not put out there are Rannick, the Thief, and Seroth, the Pit Fighter. Now I'll talk a little bit about what's on these character tiles, and by the way, these are the Dungeon Lord tiles or character tile and the adventurers are mostly the same. There's one important difference which I'll get to in a second, but these 3 orbs up here represent charges for your ultimate ability. In the beginning of the game, we're going to start off with 3 charges, 3 charge tokens on there. As long as it's fully charged, you can use your ultimate ability during challenges. If not, you have to wait until it does fully charge. And then it will describe underneath what that actually is. Now, these 2 orbs here, the light and the dark, represent this darkness track over here on the side of the board, which you're going to set up at the beginning. Now, what this represents, the hero is going to have 3 cards representing it getting lighter. So it goes from glowing to luminous to brilliant. The Dungeon Lord obviously has it going darker, clouded, dusk, and night. This is constantly going to be shifting back and forth. You can either keep track of it by putting whatever phase you're currently in off to the side slightly askew, or just keep track of it with one of the markers in the game. But what this means is that depending on which side you're on, judging, see here, these symbols match up to the symbols I just showed you on the character tile. Wherever you're currently at, that's what type of special ability you're actually going to use. So if you look back at Seroth's card here, if his Crushing Blow is activated and it's on one of the lighter cards, he's going to get 2 red dice, which are much better than the blue dice. But if it's on the dark side, he gets 2 blue dice. That's kind of what you're stuck with. Down here, it's some other stats. It's going to tell you what dice you're going to use depending on different type of challenge, and then also how many fortune tokens you're going to start off with and what your hand limit is. Fortune tokens are these happy little fellas here, and you'll get some of these at the start of every round of play, and they're just going to let you add extra dice or possibly do some other effects as well. Now, the thing that I mentioned that was very important that's different about the Dungeon Lord's character card is that on the back of it, it has little bits of story. This is a storytelling game, and when you begin the game, depending on which Dungeon Lord you chose, you as the Dungeon Lord if you are the Dungeon Lord, are going to read a little bit of story here and then give the hero a choice. And from this point forward, when I go over what these and what the story cards do, I'm really not going to focus too much on that because I don't want to give spoilers. A lot of this game hinges on the fact that the hero doesn't know what's coming up and you don't want to ruin the story for them. So I'm just going to speak about this in kind of vagaries. So for instance, here you read this little bit of story about the Ogre King and his forces, and then you have a choice that you give to the hero. You can read Search Beyond the Old Road or Travel to the Red Tusk Mountains. The hero has to decide, or the adventurer has to decide what they're going to do at that point, and then you're going to read the rest of that. And for this, this is kind of just the setup of that. You'll do the little bit of setup, and then you're going to go to the other really important part of the game, and that is the story card deck. Now, this is just a card that you're going to keep, that the Dungeon Lord will use to cover up the card so that the hero can't peek. But essentially, you're going to choose 3 cards from this stack of cards randomly, and there are 30 of these cards. You'll choose 3 at random, and those will be the story cards that you're going to use for this game. And these follow generally the same setup that I just described on the back of the Dungeon Lord card. You'll read a little bit of story text. You'll go through essentially every... the game is going to be played over 4 rounds. There's 3 of these and then the final battle. So at the beginning, you're going to get a story card, you're going to read the blurb, and then you're just going to give choices. It goes from, this is challenges that the hero must overcome. So if you give, in this Amongst Thieves story card, the choices of fight them or sneak out, then if he chooses fight them, you're going to read the story text there. There's going to be a challenge. It will tell you which challenge you're going to have to take part in this time. So now it's a strength challenge, but if you had chosen sneak out, it would be a dexterous challenge, and then it will go down from there. So depending on after fight them, you'll resolve that challenge, and it's going to go to, do you take out the archer or stomp the weak one? And then it keeps going and going. You're actually going to have 4 challenges that the Dungeon Lord and the hero have to compete against each other with. And then finally, it gets down to the final resolution at the bottom of the card. Depending on what the hero chose at that last juncture, you're going to read the story text down here, and then you'll gain an amount of experience tokens depending on what happened there. But perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. I just wanted to describe that, which is pretty much the crux of the game. So getting back to important stuff for setup, while you could make an argument that the Dungeon Lord and the Adventurer are sort of mirrors of each other as far as what their capabilities are and the different stuff that they get, each player does get distinctly different advantages that sort of balance each other out but are handled in a different way. So for instance, the Adventurer is going to get starting equipment. And so, for instance, Marace here, who is the sorceress, I can talk, is going to get this apprentice's staff and the wizard's robe and the torch. And they'll give you different special abilities. You'll have to, as the symbol here, which absolutely positively has nothing to do with tapping, we'll call it exhausting. Hero's Roll lets you re-roll one of your blue dice, but you're not going to get this back until the start of the next round, the next story, in other words. So that's something that you need to worry about and sort of keep your resources in check. And then you have the Wizard's Robe. When Wizard's Robe is breached, you gain 2 fortune. Now, breach in this game. Now, every hero's got armor, and this is the armor rating here. As you go through the course of the game, the Dungeon Lord is going to be dealing damage to the Adventurer, and whenever you deal enough damage to get to whatever that Adventurer's armor rating is, there's going to be a breach. The character doesn't die, but rather they just suffer a significant setback, which in this case is you actually gain a bonus for having the Wizard's Robe, but you are also forced to take one of these critical hit wounded cards, which is going to give you some penalty for the rest of the game. So Cower says that each time the shadow track shifts towards the dark and the Dungeon Lord has less than 5 fortune, the Dungeon Lord gains a fortune. This is forever on. And whenever you would shift the shadow track towards the dark, when Coward is put into play. Just as another example, let's see, Gory Wounds, because that sounds lovely. The hero's tactic power cards have their cost increased by 1, which I'll get to in a second. So these are just really bad things that could happen to you if the Dungeon Lord manages to breach your defenses. So it's something you should try to avoid at all costs, but sometimes it just can't be helped. The hero or adventurer, I'm kind of using those words interchangeably in case you haven't noticed. I think it's properly supposed to be the adventurer, is also going to get skill cards. And skill cards, you'll actually have 3 different schools of them, each player will. So again, each player is going to be customized and have their own sets of cards. You'll start with one level 1. So in this case, Marisa is starting with the Arcanist level 1 skill card at the beginning of the game. And you'll have, they'll tell you like which extra dice you get to roll during the particular type of challenge. So for these knowledge challenges, she gets an extra blue die. And then she'll have a special ability here, which in this case is when you learn the skill, you just gain a fortune. Up here is the cost of the skill. So for other skills that you want to purchase during the game, that's how many experience tokens you're going to have to spend in order to learn it. And you'll have a chance to do this after each challenge. And there'll be level 1, level 2, and level 3 skills. It's just like a tree. So in order to get to level 2 of Arcanist, you'd already have to have the level 1. And then each player also gets their pool of dice. The dice are going to have different symbols on them. Swords are always good for succeeding at challenges. The more swords you have, the better. You're always going to compare the swords that both the Dungeon Lord and the Adventurer get and see who has the most. If you see a little blood droplet on the die, that means you immediately get to inflict a wound. If it's against the Adventurer, then the Adventurer just takes a wound, and it might be a possible breach. But if it's against the Dungeon Lord, one of his monsters, which I'll get to in a second, is going to suffer a wound as well. That symbol is the charge. It's kind of hard to see, but it's like a little conflux symbol there. That's for the charge. So if you roll that, you immediately get to gain a charge token to possibly charge up your special ability. Then you have the blue dice, which are a little bit worse, and the red dice, which are better than the blue dice, but I don't think as good as the white or the black dice. And there are dice that have both the wound and the charge symbol as well. All right, bear with me because there's just a lot of different cards and things here. The Dungeon Lord is going to start off with a small army of monsters. You're going to have 4 level 1 monsters that you start off with at the start of the game, but you can spend XP tokens in order to level them up to their level 2 and level 3 versions, which are more powerful. They have better armor rating. They're able to take part in more challenges, and they'll have better dice to roll as well. And you'll always be able to use their special ability if they are taking part in the type of challenge. Let me put it this way. Monsters can help you out in any challenge that you're facing, but they have to match up the particular symbol. So if this goblin was taking part in an agility challenge, then you'd gain access to a special ability. Otherwise, all you get from him are the dice that he lets you roll. So in this case, if he's in an agility challenge, guess what? You're rolling an extra blue die. Whereas for the crystalline whore, if you're in an agility or a strength challenge, you'll always roll a red die, but the hero's fortune limit is reduced by 1 during this challenge. That's because you can only spend a certain amount of fortune during a turn. By the way, I think I did mess that up. This is not how much fortune you start the game with. That's how much fortune you're limited to spend. Sorry about that if I confused you there. Then over here, the other cards we have in the game, both the hero and the Dungeon Lord have their own stack of power cards. Remember, these will be customized based on the hero and the Dungeon Lord that you're using. These are cards that you'll hold in your hand, and you do have a hand limit, remember, and you can use them whenever they apply. So this one, Tribal Healing for the Dungeon Lord, says you can use it when the Dungeon Lord makes a roll, choose up to 2 different creatures, and remove a wound from each creature. Just another quick example, during the Dungeon Lord's roll, you gain an additional blue die for each wound on the active creature, because you're going to have 1 creature that is active. And then for the hero, you have cards like, look at that, there's one of Marisa's customized power cards, the Polymorph spell. When a creature is activated, the active creature loses its ability during this challenge. It's the monsters that the Dungeon Lord uses. Now, each character or each player has a chance to either get treasure or omen, depending on whether they're the adventurer or the Dungeon Lord. Omen cards are kind of like power cards that the Dungeon Lord will hold on to until they apply, but they don't count against your hand limit, and they're extremely powerful. Your fate in mind. When the hero receives 1 or more fortune tokens from a power card, final battle card, or reward token, you can cancel one the hero just received to receive 2 yourself and shift the light track. That's one example. And then for treasure, you might get good stuff that will overlap your older, worse starting equipment, like the Fire Aura Bracers, which are going to give you, you can exhaust it to get on your knowledge roll to gain an extra red die, or the Citadel Shield. When Citadel Shield is put into play, discard 2 wounds from the armor it replaces, and now you got a higher armor rating as well. So those are some of the possible things you might be able to gain during the course of the game. All right, so real quick, let me tell you how a typical round of play is going to work. So you'll do a preparation first. This is where you will draw a story card, one of the randomized story cards from the stack. If you haven't done so already, the Dungeon Lord is going to read it in preparation. Each side is going to be able to draw a couple of power cards from their deck, reset up to 5 fortune tokens, which they'll be able to use for the round. But remember, they do have a limit of how many they can actually spend in a combat in order to give themselves extra dice. And then begins the challenge phase. This is where the Dungeon Lord is going to read to the hero what choices are available to him or her, and then they have to choose. And then after they get done with the story text, then the challenge ensues, depending on whether it's strength or knowledge or agility. At that point, the Dungeon Lord is going to begin by accruing his dice pool. He's going to nominate one of the creatures that he has in front of him as his active monster. So, and you can only use each time you use one of these, even if it survives, it is going to be exhausted. If it doesn't survive, you get a new one off of the whatever deck it originally came from, one of the level 1, level 2, or level 3, but then that one comes into play exhausted as well. So essentially, and then you only unexhaust all of them when you've used them all. So essentially, you have one set of creatures for an entire story, unless something lets you unexhaust them earlier than that. So you'll nominate a creature, see how many dice you're getting. So you're getting 2 blue, decide whether or not you're going to use your ultimate ability or not. And then you also will always roll the black dice, just like the hero will always roll the white dice. So in this case, I would have 2 blue, 2 black, and let's say I just spend 2 fortune tokens, and then I use my, well, I won't even use my ultimate ability just to keep things simple. Then you roll it all and see how many swords you get and whether or not you get charges or wound tokens. Then, and after that, the hero has a chance to react and roll dice as well. The hero assembles their dice pool based on the items that they use or the skills that they want to use and the equipment that they already have, and then decides whether to spend their own fortune tokens, use their own ultimate ability, rolls and sees how many swords they get, and it has to be greater than the Dungeon Lord's roll. So ties go to the Dungeon Lord. It has to be greater in order for the challenge to be a success. Now, sometimes the challenge is going to say that there will be treasure or omen cards out in the center of the table for the applicable player to be vying for. So those might be a reward that you'll gain depending on, you'll always gain it, but it matters on how you win. So let's say that there is treasure to be gained by the hero, and if you win, you just get to look at both cards that were placed face down and choose which one you want. If you lose, it's one at random. Same thing with the omen cards. Also, if you win the challenge, you get to go into the cup. Now, this does not come with the game, obviously. This is BMO that I'm using as a cup for these reward tokens here. The reward tokens will give you benefits like this one lets you inflict a wound on either the active creature or the hero, depending on which side you're on. Some of them are double-sided, meaning you'll get both things. So in this case, you get to draw a power card and then shift the light track. So the winning player is going to get to draw 2 of these, choose which one they want, and then put the other one off to the side, and then resolve the effect and put that one into essentially the discard pile. The losing player just draws 1 from the cup and then must decide from, well, that's actually pretty good. I wonder which one I'll choose, 2 wounds or 1 wound. But the losing player has to choose from the one that the other player put off to the side and just 1 from the cup. The winner of the challenge also gains an experience token, and then at that point, either player can spend their experience tokens to either upgrade creatures if you're the Dungeon Lord, or upgrade your skills and get new skills if you're the hero. Then you're going to do all that over again. If you're still in the middle of the story, you're going to go give the hero more choices, decide which one, have another challenge. You're going to do that 4 times per story card. Then you'll resolve it. Then you're going to start it all over again, go back to the preparation phase until you've gone through 3 of these story cards. When you've completed 3 of these story cards, then it's time for the final battle. In the final battle, the hero is going to take this deck of special final battle cards, which again will have special cards based on the whatever Dungeon Lord you're actually facing, shuffle them, draw 1 at random, and these are essentially the story cards for this battle. The hero is going to read a little bit of story text, and actually there's a card that also has specific story text that they'll read at the beginning, keyed in, like the War Den for the Ogre King. So you'll read that first, then you'll draw the first card and read the story text there, and then begins another challenge. It's very, very, very similar to the other story challenges. It's just that the stakes are higher, because what you're trying to do here is win 3 challenges, therefore take 3 of these final battle cards, and if you're the first person to get 3 of these cards, you win the entire game. The thing about these final battle cards is that each one gives the hero a benefit and the the Dungeon Lord a benefit simultaneously. And then it will be keyed into a specific type of challenge. By the way, if there is a either white or black box next to one of these challenges, that means it's either going to be really easy, or really hard, as opposed to normal challenges, which mean you might either gain a die or lose a die. Or I should say, if it's easy, then the hero gets to roll an additional die, and if it's hard, then the Dungeon Lord gets to roll an additional die instead. And that's really it. I know that was a really haphazard overview of the game. I just didn't want to give too many story details away, and there's a lot of different cards and things to keep track of. But hopefully you have a general gist of what goes on in Fallen. Let's get to my final thoughts. Theme and components are solid in Fallen. I really like the artwork. I think it's dark and grim and gritty without being overly dark and grim and gritty, not too cheesy. It's really, really well done. The graphic design is slick. The physical components, I mean, it is essentially a card game at its core, but they're all done particularly well. I think the tokens and everything like that, really can't complain about it. I think the people who think, oh, look at the box, it's like this epic hero fighting a monster, it's like a dungeon crawling game, they're going to be a little bit disappointed that there's like no plastic in the box, but there's no room for it there. This is not the type of game that it is, and I definitely appreciate the effort that went into making the components as good as they are. The theme. I normally talk about theme right up front in my final thoughts because it's usually not as consequential to the rest of the mechanics of the game, but it is the central focal point of this game. So I'm going to save that for last and talk about it at length. So let's talk about the mechanics of the game. This is a fascinating two-player game in a way because essentially the Dungeon Lord and the hero are mirrors of each other. Yes, you have some different things, especially thematically. Of course, the Dungeon Lord has his array of creatures, and the hero has equipment and skills, which might represent spells in the case of the sorceress, Maurice, something like that. And so it feels different thematically, but essentially it's kind of the same thing. You have these things that are going to modify your rolls and give you bonuses to maybe give you bonus wounds or prevent wounds, things like that, or give you more fortune tokens. And then, so my creatures will do this for me, and then your equipment's going to do that for you. So it feels similar, but that actually makes the game more accessible, which is a plus. So if you play this game for the first time, and the first time I played it, I was a Dungeon Lord, I immediately knew that if I did go and play as the hero, I would know what I was doing, because it feels, some things are very different, but for the most part, I was just watching my counterpart do everything there. I felt like I could easily slip into that role. And there's 3 different characters for each, a Dungeon Lord and for the hero, and in that regard, you have different play styles. Every one of them feels different. It feels different being the sorceress as opposed to the warrior, or the thief, or the ogre king as opposed to being the archivist of secrets, and the other 2 are really weird. but that's cool too, that both thematically and mechanically they can feel very different to each other. And the game does some very innovative things. I should say that there's a ton of stuff in the game. There's a lot of different cards. It can be overwhelming on your first play, but it gets easier over time, because essentially the turns are all going to be very similar to each other, and once you get into the rhythm, it's not so bad. But you have the light and dark track. That's a very interesting mechanic. I think that sometimes one or both players might actually neglect it too much, but it can be very, very powerful with regards to your ultimate ability. Being able to just put the smack down, whereas your opponent is stuck with a weaker version of their ability. It really, when that happens too many times, they're like, okay, I gotta start moving this thing back in my direction. And I appreciate that back and forth. In some ways it can be taking your eye off of the ball, but you can't let that go too long and let your opponent get away with that for too long a period of time using the best of their abilities. I like how there's so many different types of options you can do. You have treasure for the hero, you got the omen cards, which are very actually different than the treasure cards, since those are 2 equivalent things that behave very differently. The omen cards are more like uber power cards for the overlord, whereas the treasure, it can be very powerful, but it's essentially swapping out for the equipment that you already had at the start of the game. The whole idea of breaching the armor of the hero is a super cool thing, because I was thinking about that when I first sat down to play the game, like, well, if I kill you, are you out? Well, no, you're like an epic level hero. You're not going to die, but you're going to accumulate wounds over time. And that's a cool little thematic bit, and it's handled very well, and where you just accumulate these really negative effects over time. So I like that quite a bit. The whole dice rolling mechanic is very kind of basic. I've seen this in a lot of other games. You're matching swords, and you're potentially get special effects like taking wounds, but how you can manipulate them with the fortune tokens and how the different creatures that the dungeon lord has can give you extra dice or better dice. And again, the hero has the equivalent of doing that with their equipment cards and skills. That is all really neat, and how that ties in with the story cards, and how you can be very good at one particular type of challenge but not good at another, and trying your best to make choices that you think are going to lead you down one of those paths based on what your strength is in is a very cool part of the game that I appreciated quite a bit. So the thing that I would complain about with the mechanics is that it can feel at times during the game that it can feel like you're just being overwhelmed and that you're really, really falling behind, because as your opponent wins challenges and accumulates XP and starts upgrading their stuff, whether it's upgrading creatures to a new level or getting better skills and more skills, you can feel like, oh man, I'm just getting trounced over here. It can feel like a rich gets richer thing, which is a problem. But then you get to the end of the game and realize that it may not matter at all, because it is so swingy with the dice and just not getting very lucky. You can still win the game in the final battle by doing poorly through the rest of the game. That can be a very odd thing. I can see some people complaining about that and just having it be an out of balance thing. But that's going to lead right into my discussion of the theme, because any small problems that I have with the sort of swinginess and the randomness of the mechanics of the game are overshadowed by the fact that this is supposed to be a storytelling game in a sense. This is supposed to be a very thematic and enriching game based on the story, and I do think that Fallen succeeds for the most part. But let me put it this way. The storytelling system here, the sort of choose your own adventure path building, is both one of the coolest things I've ever seen, but also fraught with some significant flaws. And I love the idea of the Dungeon Lord presenting this story to the hero, and you have to go down these different paths, and you're reading these little blurbs of text, and it's so cool when you're the hero and you're just like racking your brain, like, oh, what do I choose? I don't know, I should do this, but what if this doesn't link up to the skill that I think it does? And then it's really cool being the Dungeon Lord and watching the hero agonize over that. I love that. At the same time, a couple of immediate flaws are, you notice right away. First and foremost, the Dungeon Lord has no equivalent to this, which can feel very jarring. Everything else there's some sort of equivalent to. But as the Dungeon Lord, you do not control the story whatsoever. You're not making choices, you're presenting the choices to the hero. Yes, as the book suggests, you can ham it up however you want. You can add little bits of theme and role-playing to it, and maybe even try to do like a weird bluffing thing, like to try to make the hero go down a certain path, although that's not, I don't really think that's an official thing you could do in the rules. But sure, if you want to ham it up, you can, but on the surface of it, you can't. You can't, the Dungeon Lord has no thing like that they're doing. It is purely just illustrating this story to the hero, which can feel weird. But the bigger issue thematically is that the story cards don't link up to what is actually happening mechanically and what is initially described on the back of the Dungeon Lord card. You could say that you're going to the mountains to fight some orcs, and then all of a sudden you're reading a card about how you're in like a sand pit in the middle of the desert, or you're in an old laboratory with some cultists. I'm like, really? I thought I was fighting an orc. And then the card might be describing, and again, I don't want to give too many details about the story cards, but it might be describing that you're fighting some kind of monster, and then you're looking at your creatures as a dungeon owner, like, well, it's saying that you're fighting like a drake, but all I've got are like oozes and skeletons, but I have to choose one as the active monster. Do I just swap out the words, or what's going on here? So it feels very disconnected. The only way you can get around that would be by having hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cards to make sure that every equivalent thing can be handled, and having tons and tons of creature cards as well, or maybe just having books like the dreaded encounter book from Tales of Arabian Nights. And I hate Arabian Nights. Trust me, this game is far, far better than that. But maybe that book system, or like that, or from Agents of Smersh, might have been a better way, maybe leaving blanks for the names of the creatures. Like in Arabian Nights, it says the other, which is what you're supposed to replace with like the jinn or the demon or the woman that you just
beat and robbed, because that happens all the time in Arabian Nights. Maybe that would have been a better thing to do, but I can understand where the limitations of the expense of the game had to be taken into account. But it does lead to a thematic disconnect, and so it's great. It's just flawed, and I just wish that there was some way around that. But I still think that the game is really good. Now, I have to say one more thing here that is sort of meta. It's sort of outside of the realms of me actually reviewing the game content itself. And that is that this game was on Kickstarter, and I did not back on Kickstarter. I got a retail copy from the publisher. I probably should have said that in the beginning. And when it was on Kickstarter, they had the dreaded exclusives. And a lot of exclusives are, hey, there's some alternate art stuff, and here's some exclusive sculpts that no one else is going to get, but the game is mostly the same. And Cool Mini or Not adds extra minis, but whatever, it doesn't change the game drastically. For Fallen, they literally gave twice the amount of content. I think it was 3 heroes and 3 dungeon lords. So twice the amount of stuff, and tons and tons of more adventures, like doubling the amount of adventures you would get in the box. And all of that is completely exclusive. They will never be printed again. You would have to track down a very high-priced copy on eBay. And a lot of people, including myself, are not happy about that. It genuinely feels like if you were to go out and buy this game now at retail, you would be getting half of the game that a significant amount of gamers have already received, simply because you didn't back it on Kickstarter. That's not a choice that I'm very happy with, and the thing about the game is this wouldn't be such a problem if it wasn't for the fact that the game heavily relies on all of these story elements. Having more dungeon lords, having more heroes, having more story cards, that's the most important part. You might think 30 story cards, that's a lot, and it is, but trust me, because I know after a few games, if you're choosing them randomly, you'll start seeing them again, and they don't feel that fresh. So it's very, very, very disappointing that half of the content is just going to be unavailable to a lot of people, and you're going to have to wait for more expansion packs that are available to the common public to be released. And that is pretty disappointing. But overall, clunky things aside about the thematic storytelling, I still think this is an amazing game. It's so unique, it's like nothing else, and it's a great thematic and enriching 2-player experience that I highly recommend you at least try. That is Fallen from Watchtower Games.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.